But I'm joined again now by Frank Morano, my co-host. Frankie's here. And Fernando Uribe, our great friend of the show. He's also a faculty member at Bergen Community College and host of Insider NJ on Politically Direct on Insider NJ. Sorry about that, Fernando. How are you, buddy?
How are you, John?
Okay. So, Fernando, we talked about it a little earlier in the show, but it sure looks like Frank said, that Joe Biden, subjected himself to a pretty serious interview from Mika Brzezinski. That was one interview that was over a week ago. And it sure seems like the way they were going after Kavanaugh and the way they're treating Biden with kid gloves shows quite the double standard.
John, absolutely. And it's just yet another example of the liberal media's blatant hypocrisy and the idea that they can be sanctimonious when it suits them. If you all remember back in the fall of 2018, where there was elected officials like, senators from New York like Kirsten Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, who were adamant about, hashtag believe all women, hashtag the Me Too movement. And again, we saw a good, respectable man like Brett Kavanaugh and his character and integrity being dragged through the mud by the media and by elected officials on the left and many prominent Democrats. And now nearly 2 years later, the idea that Joe Biden's accusations seem to sort of be, generating some momentum here, and they seem to be a lot more credible. If you listen to Tara Reade's interview over the weekend with Megyn Kelly, you can hear a lot more specificity in her accusations. See, the problem with Christine Blasey Ford in the fall of 2018, John, was the fact that she didn't know if she was coming or going. And I'm not trying to be mean-spirited about this, but a lot of what she was trying to allege has been recanted. A lot of the eyewitnesses, again, could not be corroborated. It just seems like the media was very adamant in trying to take out Brett Kavanaugh from ascending to the Supreme Court. But for some reason right now, they're being hypocrites when it comes to Joe Biden.
No, that's definitely for sure. But yeah, I think I saw a headline the other day saying like the big winner of 2020 is COVID, the big loser is Me Too. Like this whole Me Too movement that was spurred on in the era of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and all this other stuff. It seems like right now that's been muted.
Well, absolutely. And John, this is the thing. And so many on the left and so many prominent Democrats have harped for years concerning the president, right? When he was a private citizen in 2005 who made a hot mic remark. And again, I'm not trying to condone it. I mean, it's a comment that was made off the record, at the Access Hollywood studio. And again, he was a private citizen. I'm not saying that the comment was correct. I'm not saying it wasn't inappropriate, but the bottom line is he was a private citizen in his capacity. Joe Biden has been in elected office for over 40 years, John. And aside from being elected office, there's a sufficient amount of evidence out there on YouTube and everything else where Joe Biden is just creepy. There's a lot of inappropriate touching. There's hair sniffing. There's just a lot of inappropriate behavior by the former vice president. And I don't understand why media outlets like the New York Times and other liberal, institutions are giving him a pass. They are. And I don't see how people who are just so delusional about getting this president out of office that some are going on record and saying, I believe Tara Reade, but you know what? I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. John, if that was a Republican running for office, I'm telling you right now, that rhetoric would not fly in today's politics.
I mean, there were Republicans in 2016 in the aftermath of the Trump video that said in words or substance the same thing. You saw, I think Mike Pence's wife say something similar, and she's now the second lady of the United States. I think it's a real shame, that, we're just elevating all of these accusations to the point where they need to be taken into consideration by the voter. In both the Kavanaugh situation and the Biden situation, these are two, well, in one case a girl, but a girl and a young woman who didn't go to police. They didn't do anything to have these purported assaults taken care of at a time when law enforcement could have done something about it. I think it's unfair to ask the Senate, in the case of Justice Kavanaugh, or the voters, in the case of Joe Biden, to all of a sudden solve this, solve this problem and make the past right. I'm not taking anything away from what you and John said about the double standard. It certainly seems to exist, but I mean, if it's literally a he said, she said, there's no way at this point to prove or disprove the strength of any of her allegations. I mean, don't we have to then conduct the election on the basis of the issues that we think are important, the
Sure.
candidates'
Yeah,
characters, their opinions?
But Frankie, let me just ask you this: how did they ultimately, with the balance of the Supreme Court being the prize or the goal, how did they actually get to the bottom of these crazy, or at least somewhat crazy allegations or unfounded from Blasey Ford? Brett Kavanaugh had to submit to an FBI investigation, unfortunately, right?
Well, then he had already done that. He had already been vetted by the FBI prior to Dr. Ford's testimony, and that's part of what every Supreme Court nominee goes through.
But then after her testimony or before her testimony, they gave them like 2 more weeks to reinvestigate this particular claim, which they may have not found, right? So shouldn't Joe Biden be held to that standard?
So you want the FBI to investigate an allegation from one person in 1993?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I'm just saying, if there's no double standard, then let's do the same thing. 2-week, quick FBI investigation. The FBI obviously found nothing. That's why Brett Kavanaugh is now on the Supreme Court. Maybe it exonerates Joe perfectly too, and that's the new standard for, top level positions in executive, legislative.
Well, I think that's a real shame, because you're already seeing the electron microscope on those that would go into politics so glaring that it's keeping a lot of good people from wanting to go into politics.
Yeah, like
if
me.
you're going to say to some people, all right, you have the audacity to want to serve your country now and put your record before the voters, in addition to having to raise $200 million just to have a chance at being taken seriously. Now you're going to have to subject yourself and your family to an FBI investigation, not for something that you did yesterday or last week or last year, but for something that happened 27 years ago. Come on, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, no. As much as I
John,
want,
if I could just add something real quick.
yeah, go ahead, Fernando.
Yeah, let me just add something real quick. I mean, what's again astounding to me, as we've just sort of talked about this repeatedly, again, is not only the blatant double standard, but again, it's the presence of COVID, and it is really taking away from a lot of what this campaign season was meant to be about. Right, the president finally facing a Democratic challenger. And since the Mika Brzezinski interview on MSNBC, I mean, again, Joe Biden has been relatively unavailable, and rightfully so. I mean, his campaign has to be terrified for all the criticisms the president's taking during this pandemic. The president, I would argue, John, is still in a very good position as the incumbent to win this November. And I know that seems like crazy because we're still some 7 months away from Election Day. But when we look at Joe Biden's record, which is going to come up eventually sometime during the fall, when we return to some sense of normalcy, hopefully, Joe Biden's record is going to be front and center. And that's something that Joe can't run from. I'm not talking about these accusations. We're talking about his time in the Senate and, quite frankly, his time as vice president during the Obama administration. And as we saw over the weekend, especially with the Michael Flynn story breaking and more information being out there, there's a lot of shady behavior that Joe Biden was associated with. And that's going to be front and center during this campaign, John.
I'm watching this stuff closely, how it's unfolding with all these records that are coming out. Crossfire Hurricane, Crossfire Razor, who knew? Did Obama know? Did Biden know? Because again, we may see again if there's a double standard like the Ukraine thing, using their political power to investigate people. But we got to leave it there. Fernando, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And keep us posted.
Thank you, Fernando.
We'll see you again next Monday. And we'll see you again in just a minute when Annette Rayner joins us from InvestU. I'm an officer in the company also. It's one of the world leaders in investor education. Talk about a very special webinar you might want to tune into tonight, right after this.